Monty, you have been so instrumental in kind of pointing me in the right direction. And
it was about looking at your character defects in spirituality.
It's the integration of clinical practices with the 12 steps.
It's an absolute pleasure. He certainly knows a lot of people. He's got a lot of energy, and sometimes when you don't have so much energy, he picks you up and carries you.
Having the Monty Man there certainly helps.
This is one of the places that is about the business of the solution.
The views expressed on this special broadcast of the Take 12 radio show do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting or its affiliates. KHLT is not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
Now here's that guy who's getting less popular minute by minute. Your host, the Multi-Man.
Well, greetings, recovery friends and family. Those of you who are advocates of, and perhaps some of you who should be in recovery, thank you for tuning in to another fine episode here at Take12Radio.com on your internet dial, broadcasting to you a different and unique recovery show every day of the week, available 24/7, along with recovery and positive music. It is good to have you with us. Our email address is take12radio@comcast.net. And tell your friends and all those who might be interested, they can type in take12radio.com, the word take12, or the number, either way. And they'll come directly to our website. We have a brand new look. Everybody's going green, so I thought we should too. And so we have kind of a green theme running through our website now. And we are on every major social networking site that there is out there, including YouTube, and all of our broadcasts are on YouTube as well. So it makes it very easy for you to listen to our shows on your tablets, your smartphones, your computers, and even in some of your cars now that have internet radio stuff going on. It's just stuff amazes me. Hey, listen, we got just a great treat for you on this show today. I mean, this is really, and we got some surprises that you may not know about my guest. Dr. Jamie Marich is on the show with us, and Dan Griffin is on the show. Now, let me tell you about these two characters. I just think the world of both of them. Jamie has worked in mental health residential treatment and in chemical dependency treatment as an inpatient, outpatient, and dual diagnosis counselor. Jamie obtained her PhD in counseling studies from Capella University and an MA in counseling from the Franciscan University of Steubenville. Jamie also teaches for several reputable online universities, and she offers original workshops for counselors and social workers on a regular basis throughout the country. She is also the author of a fantastic book called Trauma and the 12 Steps. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that. And Dan Griffin, he has worked in the mental health and addictions field for almost 2 decades. He's the author of the great book, I recommend it highly, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, and that is published by Hazelden. This is the first trauma-informed book taking a holistic look at men's experience of recovery from addictions. He is the co-author of groundbreaking curriculum, Helping Men Recover, the first trauma-informed curriculum to deal with men's unique issues and needs. Both of these people that are just amazing to me are extremely talented. And what some of you may or may not know is both of them are also what I consider recovery recording artists. They both have great voices. They both they sing. Dan plays the guitar. Jamie, do you play an instrument?
I play guitar and violin, yes.
Guitar and violin. Dan, have you touched the violin yet?
No, but I do play piano.
Piano. Okay, so we both got dual diagnosis here on both of you guys.
Yeah.
And please.
Well, we're going to be hearing some music from both of these fine folks, but we're going to be talking today about trauma, and this is really like the favorite topic with these guys. You guys have worked together before on presentations, correct?
Yeah, we had a chance to do one presentation together, and we do a lot of, I don't know, Dan, how would you call it, just what I consider collaboration in terms of talking to each other and getting some experience, strength, and help about what it's like to be teaching this trauma message out there to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what's nice is that we're learning from each other and growing and evolving our thinking. And I think we also take very seriously the idea that the mantle is being passed from one generation to the next. And we know that we're part of that next generation and feel very passionately about this message about trauma.
Dan, let me ask you, why has the issue of trauma been overlooked for so long within the recovery community?
Well, there's a lot of ways you could approach that. Interestingly enough, we've actually been talking about trauma for a long time, kind of like we talked about addiction for a long time, but we didn't really have the research and the brain, the understanding of the brain until around 1990s, where they really just kind of catapulted forward as far as the understanding of the brain. And as we've expanded our understanding of the brain, we've also kind of, quote unquote, rediscovered trauma. So when we were talking about toxic shame and ACOAs and a lot of the stuff back in the 80s, even codependency, at the heart of that was trauma. And there were people like John Bradshaw and Tion Dayton, Pia Melody, who were using the word trauma. But I think probably one of the biggest challenges, one of the things that I like to say is that, we are a traumatized field and we work with traumatized clients, and then we send them to a traumatized recovery community. And I think that's part of why this has been overlooked. We've got so much untreated, undiagnosed trauma in and around the community that it's hard. It's hard to look at and it's hard to see. Similarly, like what happened with codependence, people started feeling like, my God, if I pay attention to this, then everybody in my life, including me, is codependent.
Right.
And that's distinguishing between codependent behavior and then an actual kind of a codependent diagnosis, so to speak, or codependent disorder. And so there's traumatic experiences as well as those who have, trauma disorders, which Jamie can speak to much more eloquently than I can.
Jamie, you work with both men and women, correct?
I do, yes.
So who speaks more openly about their trauma, men or women?
Honestly, it depends on the person.
Yeah.
I've had several men come in, very ready to heal. And I've had other men who have been very, it's a stigma issue to, I often say it's a bigger stigma to talk about your trauma than it is about your alcoholism or your addiction, especially in men. I don't like to make generalizations. I do think, there's issues working with both genders, although, and I'm sure Dan could speak more eloquently about this, the field, both mental health and addiction has tended to provide more support for women who want to specifically speak about trauma. Because I think we have, identified now in the last 2 decades that, yes, a lot of women are traumatized and need that specific attention and specific platform to be able to work with it. But I think as a result, a lot of our willingness to work with men about trauma, I don't want to say willingness, but our readiness to work with men on trauma has been kind of put on the back burner.
Since I've met both you guys, and I've known Dan longer than you, Jamie, but in talking with both of you over the years, what I've noticed while attending my own 12-step support meetings that I never noticed before is I'm hearing traumatic experiences constantly in the sharing. I mean, everything from sexual abuse to spiritual abuse, which is something you also work with, Jamie.
Oh, yes.
And it amazes me that we haven't, I know you say we've been talking about it a long time, but within our prospective 12-step fellowships, it hasn't been something that's really come up a lot that I've heard before as far as addressing the issue. It's almost like it's an outside issue, if I can coin a phrase.
Sure.
How do we get, let me ask both of you guys, how do we get the folks within the 12-step community talking about this stuff?
I have a lot of feelings on this. In my book, Trauma and the 12 Steps, I talk a lot about how my first sponsor was willing to talk about it. And I think because that was the case, that's why I stuck around when I first got sober. I love what Dan says about sending people into a traumatized field, because I think by and large there's a resistance even within 12 Step. Take professional community outside, but just in the meetings, there's a resistance to work with trauma for a couple of reasons. One is, well, we're here to deal with our addiction, and we know those debates go on in the fellowships all the time about, should you be talking about outside issues? And I think some people get so rigid about what meetings should be instead of addressing what's really going on with people. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book I did, Trauma and the 12 Steps, because it has a dual audience for both counselors and sponsors. Because I think this issue of trauma is something sponsors need to be aware of as well. Because we'll just be creating healthier meeting cultures, healthier sponsee relationships. If we just get an awareness going about what trauma is, that, it really is hard to separate the two, the trauma from the addiction. And we're really doing people a disservice by saying, don't drink, go to meetings, just work the steps. There's a reason that a lot of people don't stick around, and I think not wanting to have these difficult explorations about the trauma is a big reason why.
I love Jamie's book, Trauma and the 12 Steps. I mean, I immediately reached out to her when I learned about it, and I recommended all the trainings that I go to, that I lead, just simply because I think it just is such a wonderful conversation and discussion about how trauma shows up constantly in the 12 Steps. I mean, if you look at Bill's story, you see trauma everywhere.
Yeah.
When you read the stories in the back of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, you hear trauma. The thing is that we didn't always have the construct of trauma. And so we talk about abuse. We talk about this, we talk about that. And in the context of the steps, there's a lot of great healing that has happened. But then there's a lot of people, because of not knowing about trauma, that have re-traumatized people in the recovery community. And it happens all the time. I mean, it's like living a lot of times in a giant dysfunctional alcoholic family where we're all trying to get sober, but we haven't looked at our ACOA issues, our codependency, our trauma, and we're just bouncing off of each other, praying to God that some of us stay sober. And, it doesn't have to be like that. And so I think there's a bottom line, and I think those of us who see it and who get it, I feel passionately have a responsibility to be talking about it with the people we sponsor, talking about it. Every time I do a lead, every time I'm invited to speak somewhere within a 12-step fellowship outside of my professional career,
right,
I always now talk about it. And I didn't. I didn't for a long time that I was even doing this work. And I think similar to other issues that used to be considered outside issues, I think this will ultimately, 10, 15 years from now, I think it will not be uncommon for us to be sitting in a meeting to hear people talking about how they have also been healing from their trauma or what happened to their sobriety when they really began dealing with their trauma. Because right now, the sad thing is that there's almost this complicit belief that says, when you have 15 or 20 years of sobriety, you deal with your trauma because it's kicked your ass enough. And, I think I can speak for Jamie when I say that's completely unacceptable. And those of us who stay sober that long are the exception to the rule. So, I'll get on a soapbox about this anytime, and anybody who wants to call it an outside issue, I can't get behind that.
I totally agree with you. And Jamie, you said something about, we get so stringent about outside issues. The deal of it is, if it is associated with my recovery, if it's associated in any way with my illness, then it is not an outside issue. It's very much an inside issue. Yeah.
Totally. And something I agree about is the reason so many people have difficulty with steps 4 and 5, I really believe are related to trauma and unresolved trauma. Because, there's a great slogan that unless you do a 4th, you'll pick up a 5th. Or if you don't do a 5th, you'll pick up a 5th. I mean, I think the reason there is so much resistance to do those steps, which are phenomenally healing steps, is because people are so flooded, and that's, trauma related. And this is why people can get a good amount of sobriety under their belt, work the first 3 steps, but really struggle with 4 and 5. A lot of special care has to be taken to do those steps in a real sensitive manner that, honors what the steps are about, but also takes into an account what might be triggering a person. And so on that token, most especially, of course, it's a recovery issue.
I look forward to the day when we have a trauma-informed recovery community. And what that means is that every meeting we're focused on safety. Every meeting we're focused on creating a space of trust and empowerment. And what that also means is that, it'll just become basic knowledge that if somebody is working on a 4-step, or let's say you're doing a 5th step with somebody and they start talking about abuse, you're not going to say, what was your part? Like, that's one of the ways we re-traumatize people, I think, in the 4th and 5th step, is when they begin to finally have the courage to talk about their abuse. Sometimes after it's their 3rd or 4th, 5th step. Yeah. And we have this sponsor who, in all their own shame and untreated trauma, a lot of the time, looks at this person and says, well, what was your part? Your part, you've been carrying this around. Your part is that, you were a really hard kid. You were a pain in the ass. You've already told me that. Your part was this. Your part, and it's like, I say this very unequivocally in a man's way through the 12 steps. I don't care what you did. I don't care how you acted. There is absolutely no your part when it comes to abuse. And until we emphasize and make, shout that message from the rooftops of the recovery community, I think we'll continue to re-traumatize people, in particular with that step, as Jamie was saying.
Yeah, and we do things like we say, well, she got drunk, so if she hadn't got drunk, she had to have been raped. And so just putting herself in that position, she was asking for it. We say stuff like that, and it makes me sick.
It does to me, too, as a woman. And another issue that I think, I'll keep this snowball rolling in terms of, I'm so glad Dan said about creating a safe space at meetings. Mm-hmm. There are, and I say this unequivocally and passionately, there are some meetings in my local recovery area where I would never send a woman. I would, and I don't know, Dan, how you feel, about the male piece. I'll let you comment on that. But, so many women at meetings getting picked up on and, really, I see stuff at meetings that makes my stomach curdle or turn in terms of just what women feel that they encounter even at meetings, or the whole forced hugging, the whole we hug around here. Because, I'm all for hugs and handshakes. But to me, part of being sensitive is recognizing not everybody wants to be touched.
That's right.
Not everybody is ready to be touched. And, I think a meeting should be a place where there's safety. I'll tell you a funny story because, both of you know I got sober in Europe in a very small town, and our meetings were very small. Right. And the first time I came to a meeting in the States and somebody hit on me, I felt like violated. Like, oh, my God, this is supposed to be a safe space for me. This hadn't happened in my experience where I was going to meetings. And, I think issues like that, that's something that makes me sick, just how certain meetings aren't safe places for people to come to because of those trigger issues. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dan, you want to comment on the men's side of that?
Well, first, I just want to reiterate what Jamie's saying. I don't think you can be concerned about men's issues and men's recovery and not be concerned about women's issues and women's recovery. Amen. And what I mean by that is, as men, we have to start speaking up. I don't even go to mixed meetings anymore. But if men are going to mixed meetings, we have to start speaking up about the predators, about the men that are in there who are preying on women out of their own trauma. Out of their own stuff that they're doing, their own insecurity, their own sexual confusion, their own lack of sexual confidence, but they're preying on these women So that's one. That's one of the things that has to stop. Two, we do have to stop talking about it like this is an issue that only affects women. I've sponsored multiple guys who have been 13 steps by women, but we view it sometimes as like, oh, look at him. He's got 6 months. He's dating a woman with 10 years. It's kind of like the same way we shift it in our society, where like a young guy having sex with his teacher and hot teacher kind of phenomenon. It can be equally impactful, equally emotional. And so I think, the main thing is I think we have to just stop the collusion and really stop the way that, we're complicit. Those of us who don't say anything, I think, are absolutely contributing to the problem, if not being guilty. But the last thing I'll say is, but we also cannot, I can't say this strong enough, we cannot then completely isolate those men in particular, but the men and women who are acting out from the community. They need help. They need our healing, or they need healing and our support, and we need to figure out a way that we can help everybody to heal, because this is all the face of trauma.
And I want to say, I'm going to say this very as carefully as I know how to. There are men and women who have been 13 stepped, so to speak, by members of the same sex. I mean, we have a gay and lesbian community that is healthy and thriving within our 12-step fellowships today, and sometimes that happens, and that needs to be addressed. So I mean, boy, this is really vital stuff, and we need to pay close attention to it. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, I have a surprise for the listeners, some fun stuff here, and we're going to be talking more about trauma. I want to talk about some of the rules we put on people that keep them from opening up about their traumatic experiences. Don't go away, folks. More when we return.
We understand that having a loved one caught in the grips of an addiction is a powerless position to be in, and we understand this on a very personal level. We have been there ourselves. Our own families have experienced exactly what you are feeling now. The good news is we are here to direct you in finding a way out. We are Freedom Interventions, providing the direction necessary to get the help for your addicted loved one. Your family has specific needs. We can determine the best approach for your specific circumstances. If an intervention is needed, we will provide the direction required to safely and effectively accomplish the goal of recovery for all. To begin the recovery process for your loved one, call toll-free at 888-762-7557. That's 888-762-7557. And visit our website at freedominterventions.com. Freedom Interventions, providing drug and alcohol interventions and a continuum of care services to clients and their families.
This is Dr. Alan Berger, author of 12 Stupid Things That Mess Up Recovery. You're listening to Take12Radio.com, featuring recovery talk and positive music.
Stinky feet, well, I guess I got stinky feet. Smelly socks and stinky feet. There's nothing wrong with stinky feet.
Yes, indeedy. And that is none other than the voice of Dan Griffin, our own Dan Griffin, with his song Stinky Feet. One of the things that many of you may not realize is that both of my guests are quite accomplished musicians in their own right. I knew that about Jamie. I had no idea until just the other day about Dan. That is actually from his website where he's working with kids. Dan, that must be a hoot, huh?
Oh, I love it. I mean, when it looked like my wife and I weren't going to be able to have kids some years ago, I had already kind of had all this energy come up around that. I play guitar. My niece and nephew were with us at the lake one day, and I wrote like 6 kid songs in that day, and I just kind of channeled all that energy into that, and then they sat there for like 5 years until this past year where I kind of pulled them out again, and so now I've put up a website, dangriffinmusic.com, and just for fun. I mean, I don't pretend for a second that I'm a accomplished musician. I'm just somebody who loves it and loves to play music.
Well, I think you're accomplished.
It's fun stuff. It's really fun stuff. He played me a couple songs, and I found myself very much dancing along with them.
Oh, right on.
Honor that spirit.
Well, yeah, you both are very, very good at what you do. And I called Marich in, and Dan has met my wife on several occasions. And I said, guess who this is? And she recognized your voice, and she couldn't quite place it. And so then I showed her the website, and she said, oh, my gosh. She goes, I can totally see him doing that. You know, most people know that Dan is a character, and but he's got a very serious side about him as well. And this issue of trauma is certainly a focus of yours. Dan, let me ask you, and I want to ask this of Jamie as well. There's these rules, and I got to tell you, Dan, I really appreciated you and Raleigh doing the presentation at the Cape Cod Symposium on Addictive Disorders on this thing about these rules that we put on people that keeps them from opening up about their traumatic experiences. What are some of the rules that we put on each other?
Well, and this might be where Jamie and I differ a little bit. I'm not completely sure. We're still hashing that out.
Okay.
But, you know, a big part of my belief is that men have certain rules and women have certain rules, or at least the idea of being a man in our society, being a woman in our society is so strong. And for a lot of the men, the rules that keep us from, from talking about trauma is essentially you can't be a man and talk about trauma. I mean, admitting that you've had trauma means admitting that you have experienced a lack of power, that you are weak, that you, have, that you're not strong. I mean, at least that's what we think. And so the rules are this kind of way that we structure and set men up and women up to kind of live according to a certain script. And it's been going on for millennia. But I think the truth is that there are some ways that we expect men to behave that are absolutely counter to them being able to not only open up about trauma, but even, get into recovery. I mean, we're not supposed to talk about our feelings. Men can't be sad. If we're sad or if we cry, it means that we're weak or we're, quote unquote girls or anything like that. And when you internalize all of that shame, when you internalize all of those beliefs, talking about trauma is incredibly difficult. I've worked with men for 20 years now, and I've watched men will say, I've experienced violence, I've done this, but when you want to really get them out of their head and into the grief and into the healing component of processing that trauma, it is challenging because you're working through some of these pieces. Now, there's a lot more complications to it, and there's great people who can really create a really safe place for a man to begin opening up to that. But those are some of the rules, I would say, that keep men from opening up about traumatic experience.
Sure. Jamie, are there rules that we put on women, too?
Well, I mean, I think there are, for a lot of us, because I think there is this maybe an assumption that it's easier for women because we are more feeling and more emotional creatures. But I think that's, even a bit of a harsh stereotype because I think there are other variables besides gender with rules that we need to consider. For example, I think one of the biggest ones is growing up in the alcoholic home. And the whole, rules we get in that home, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. I think, they may manifest differently in men and women, but essentially, if you grow up in that experience where you're not allowed to go there with feelings, of course it's going to be more difficult to be able to talk about trauma. And in working with, clients in recovery, both men and women, that's one of the first roadblocks we have to look at is, where did you get these messages that you can't feel or that you're not safe to feel? And sometimes it is, a clear societal message about gender, but other times it's what was taught in the home, and I see that go on in both men and women.
You bet.
Yeah, I think,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I don't know how much we want to get into this conversation, but I think these are the nuances that we talk about because, you know, as somebody who grew up in a very violent alcoholic home, like I totally understand what Jamie is saying. I think, you know, I'm a trained sociologist, so I think systems, and I also am a trained CD counselor, so I think the micro. So I have a hard time sometimes separating those things. I think all things being equal, you take a man who grows up in an alcoholic home and a woman who grows up in an alcoholic home, or you take a man who doesn't grow up in one and a woman who doesn't grow up in one, I think you'll still find that there are more difficulties not only for men in general, right? I am going to generalize, in general, to talk about trauma, but for us as people who work with those men and support those men to recognize the trauma, to honor the trauma, to give them a space to create it. I mean, Jamie's coming from a place that I really respect as someone who gets trauma.
Yeah.
As somebody who really understands, you know, what that looks like and how it shows up for men and women. But she is the exception to the rule in our field. And so part of why I bang this drum so loudly is because until the field is full of Jamies, then I will continue to generalize because we've got far too many men, more so than women, leaving treatment, leaving services without anybody talking to them about their trauma, and then going into environments where if you talk about trauma, a lot of the times the implicit, you don't even have to come out and say it, but the implicit perpetrator of trauma is who?
Men.
Almost default. That's when we talk about perpetrators,
that's what we're talking about.
Mean men. And don't even bring in race because then it compounds it. And I lastly just want to say I really appreciate, Monty, your last comment because I realized I was being very heterosexist in how I was even talking about the issue of 13th stepping and that factor. I mean, the issue of trauma is alive and well in all, you know, communities,
right?
LGBT as well as others. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, I want to get real personal with you for a minute, Dan. Dan, you've gone through your own trauma. You you lost your dad. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I want to play this song that you wrote called Memories of You. Can you share that with the listeners?
Sure. Well, you know, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Jamie and I think are both very open about our trauma experiences and that being a core part of why we do this. And I think that's why maybe we're so passionate. And for me, you know, my father was a very sick alcoholic who died when I was 21. His chronic alcoholism took a very bad turn when I was 14. He was violent. He was a very traumatized man, I've learned since he died. And so I never knew him. And I was, you know, deathly afraid of him. And at a certain point it turned, and I became the man he feared. And that was the last thing I wanted. But, you know, that's the kind of insanity that exists in alcoholic homes, especially sometimes between men. And the sadness was when he died. Any chance of that kind of reconciliation, at least between me and him on this earth, was gone. And that's part of where the song came from.
Was this hard for you to write?
No.
Yeah.
It was hard for me not to write it.
Yeah, I get that. You bet. So this was healing for you.
Absolutely. I think anybody who does anything with the arts, I mean, I think, again, Jamie and I both believe so strongly that the arts are such a huge part of healing, and particularly trauma healing. And so music and poetry have always been a huge piece for me in my healing.
Well, here's Dan's song entitled Memories of You.
Never wanted it to end this way. I tried to save you with the things I said. I hear the echoes of your voice wish I made another choice. The fear and pain that clouded up my mind, and memories of you weigh upon my mind. You left me, I feel all alone. You left me and I'm on my own. And I try to hold my tears at bay. And I try to make the pain go away. Don't know why it had to be this way. Things left to do and left to say. I scream at God in vain. Lord, I'll never see you again. The distant faces that you left behind, and memories of you weigh upon my mind. You left me, I feel all alone. You left me and I'm on my own. And I try to hold my tears at bay. And I try to make the pain go away. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why.
Memories of You, Dan Griffin. Okay, we're going to be back right after this. I want to welcome our brand new sponsor, Origins Origins Recovery Centers. We'll be right back. Hey there, this is the Monty Man, and I want you to know about what I consider the absolute gold standard in substance abuse treatment. Origins Recovery Centers. Origins treatment philosophy represents a rare fusion of contemporary addiction medicine and clinical sciences with a profound immersion in the timeless 12-step experience. At Origins, they leverage evidence-based clinical and pharmacological therapies within the classic 12-step framework to deliver a compelling system of longer-term individualized treatment. And Origins provides the most preeminent aftercare and relapse prevention program available in the United States. For a free confidential clinical assessment, I want you to call this toll-free number, 888-843-8935. Again, that's 888-843-8935. Origins, delivering real solutions for real people.
You and I know all too well how talented folks in recovery are. KHLT Broadcasting, the Take 12 Recovery Radio Show, and the Recovery Broadcasting Network are handing you the opportunity to share some of that talent. If you've ever written your own songs and have always wanted to share them publicly, here's the chance to share your talent with thousands of people all over the world through internet radio. For the next several months, the Monty Man will be reviewing songs written and performed by people in recovery. Whether you're an accomplished musician or a novice, he wants to hear from you. All forms of music will be considered, adhering to federal copyright laws and possible contractual agreements. Some restrictions may apply.
Hey, listen, folks, if you want to submit your songs, just click on the Submit your Music link on take12radio.com on your internet dial, and there's a form you can fill out that this talks about your music, and send that in to us. We receive MP3 streaming links as well as CDs, no cassettes, please. All right. My guest today is Dan Griffin and Dr. Jamie Marich, and they are both have a passion for this whole topic of trauma, because many of us, we go through our 12-step support meetings. We apply and implement the spiritual principles found in the 12 steps. And many times we just jump right over the whole issue of trauma. Let me ask both you guys, because I was asked this question, can trauma be passed from one generation to the next? And let me kind of rephrase that question. If I've gone through some traumatic stuff, can I pass on an attitude? Can I pass on the whole deal of don't talk, don't tell, and all that to my kids, and then they don't talk about their stuff?
Yeah. I mean, one of the principles of trauma is that until it's resolved and healed, it will continue to fester. I mean, our official term for that is either called like repetition compulsion or trauma recapitulation. It's this idea that trauma is very cyclical. It's very intricate. And, unless the wound is healed, it continues to fester. And, of course, that gets passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many clients I've dealt with who, they're responding to trauma that was perpetuated against them by their parents, but in turn it was trauma that their parents put on them, and so on and so forth. And even cell biologists are really interested in this phenomenon and how there can be cellular changes over time due to long-term experiences with trauma and oppression in groups of people. So, of course, it's something that can get passed down.
You bet. Have you seen that, Dan? Have you witnessed that?
Well, I can't agree more with what Jamie's saying. I mean, it's been interesting for me. I mean, I think my eyes continue to open about the impact of trauma. And I was actually talking to a man at a conference, and I'm Irish, he talked about the generational trauma of the Irish. And until then, I had never thought about it. And it was really interesting. It was only a year and a half ago. And then I thought about it, and then I thought about my family, and I thought about my generations of my family, and I thought about, it even allowed me to see my father's behavior in a slightly different context. So there's the interfamilial transmission of trauma. There is the cultural transmission of trauma. I mean, there are people in our society who experience trauma simply because they are not part of the dominant group, simply because they are not part of the norm. Not all of them, but a lot of folks do. So trauma is a very tricky thing, and I think Jamie just said it really well. It just until it's healed, it's an odd thing of how it gets passed down. And from a spiritual perspective, I think there's something very profound happening.
I think one of the things we have to consider, especially if you're struggling with, what does trauma mean? I mean, trauma simply means wound. It comes from the Greek word meaning wound. And I tell people all the time in recovery, or people that I train, think of everything you know about physical wounds and how they heal, and what could happen to wounds if they don't get the proper care. They tend to fester, and I think one of the most sound colloquial recovery slogans out there is that idea that hurt people hurt people. Until things tend to get resolved or healed, we we pass it on because that's all we know.
Sure, you bet. Okay, now, I want to address this idea that I've heard from a fellow colleague of all three of ours, that there's a concern that if we focus so much on trauma, that we'll get away from the application and implementation of the 12 steps. So my question to you guys is, how can we marry these two things together? How can the 12 steps help us to deal with trauma so we don't skip over this?
Dan, do you want to go first? Because I feel like I could.
I was going to say you wrote the book on it. I mean, I'll say a little bit, but Jamie really, I think, can speak to this extremely well. Look, I mean, the truth is there are people who can overemphasize anything. We can overplay trauma. There's no question. I get concerned sometimes when I hear some people talking about trauma because they speak about it as if we resolve the trauma, we've resolved the addiction. So once you clear out all the trauma, somebody can go back to safely using. So, you have different extremes. So you have that extreme that basically sees trauma as everything.
Right.
And you just got to deal with the trauma. Then you have the other extreme, which is you just got to work the steps, and there is no real trauma. You're just feeling sorry for yourself, and it's self-centered fear, and you're playing a victim, and you're doing this and that. Never mind all the brain research. Just get over it. So I think the middle way, the classic middle way, is the place where you absolutely not only can emphasize the 12 steps, but you can use the 12 steps as an incredible catalyst for healing. The last thing I'll say is that, one of the things my book, I think, really attempts to show is that the 12 steps can help us deal with anything if we use them for that. And I think that's the key.
Right. Jamie?
And I think too, one of the misconceptions about, addressing trauma and trauma treatment is that it means we have to go back to the past and dig everything out, and these may be relapse triggers or give people excuses. I mean, can trauma be used as an excuse? Absolutely. It all depends on how we frame it, because something I talk to professionals a lot about is, you can be doing trauma-sensitive work without necessarily even talking about the trauma just yet. But, like things like helping people learn how to breathe, helping people use good body-based coping skills, be sensitive to triggers, and how certain meetings may trigger people, or how certain things may make the 12-step meetings not appealing. Like Dan said, I wrote a book about it, so I could go on and on. But I always look to the example given to me by my first sponsor. She had 25 years sober. She really got trauma, was a trained social worker, so I think her having some of that professional background helped. But something she was able to do was validate everything I went through and not just fluff it off. Like, that's insignificant, because we're cutting off such a big part of a person's humanity, and that's shaming when we do that. And how she approached it was, Jamie, after everything you went through in your life, in your family history, it's no wonder you became an alcoholic, but what are you going to do about it now? And I think that statement was so impacting for me personally, and that's how I train people now, that we can validate a person's experience, but then issue the challenge that, now's the time to work on it. And, I think for people who do use trauma just as an excuse, of course it's going to do more harm than good. But, if it can become a way that we can validate and, release people of some initial shame they might feel, then, of course, we can work the 12 steps even better. Because I said when I started, I don't think I would have stuck around if I wasn't met with that sense of, I honor your story, I honor what happened.
Really well said from both of you. Okay. People want to know more. Whenever this issue of trauma comes up, I get emails. People want to know more. So let's start with you, Jamie. Let's talk about your websites. You got a lot of websites. Both of you do.
I do, yeah. Probably on this topic, the best one I would send people to is trauma12.com. It's the number 12 spelled out.
Yeah.
So TRAUMATWELVE.com. And I have a lot of resources right up there. Some links about where you can get the book, but some videos, articles, some guided meditations that are very trauma sensitive that people can download. I also have the Dancing Mindfulness website, dancingmindfulness.com, because as you mentioned, I do a lot with the arts as a method of healing. But if people visit either one of those two websites, they'll be able to find me, get in touch with me, and access some more resources.
Dan, how about you?
I encourage people to go to www.trauma12.com. 12, spell out the word.
Thank you, Dan.
I mean that in all sincerity. My website's www.dangriffin.com, and it's GRIFFIN.com, or helpingmenrecover.com. And, I think I've got some pretty solid resources on there. I could probably benefit from reviewing my website. There's some really wonderful resources out there that can help people, learn about this. Tian Dayton has written some wonderful stuff about the ACOA syndrome and how it's affected by trauma. I could name a bunch of resources, but I have some listed on my website. I know Jamie has them listed on hers. So, yeah.
Excellent. And Dan,
I want to say, Monty, I just was going to say, I just really want to thank you for playing that song. I don't want to take any more time, but I just want to say that that's the first time I've actually shared that song publicly.
Really?
And I was not expecting you to play the whole thing, so I am just really touched by your decision to do that. So thank you.
Well, absolutely, and you both. I respect both of you so much, and what you guys are doing is just so vitally important. And if we don't deal with this stuff, if we don't share our experience, strength, and hope when it comes to trauma, we're really missing the boat. I just thank you so much for your work. It means so much to our listeners and to so many people.
Thank you, Monty.
You bet.
For giving us the platform.
We have
absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely, and I want you guys to come back anytime. Don't wait for me to call you. If you've got something you want to share, if you've got more music, if you've got more books, if you've got stuff you got, at some point, Dan, we want to talk about your new website. We don't have time today to do that you and Dr. Berger have put together, but I want to address that. Please call me. Please email me. You guys are on the very top of our priority list when it comes to requests to be on the show. And we get a lot of requests. I can't accommodate everybody. But you guys are definitely a priority because this is such an important issue. We only have a couple minutes left. I know, Dan, you have to go, but I want to make sure that the listeners hear this song that Dr. Jamie. Do people call you Dr. Jamie sometimes?
You can call me Jamie.
Okay.
I'm not hung up on titles.
I know. Dr. Jamie's kind of endearing, though. It's like Dr. Phil, Dr. Bob, Dr. Mon, Dr. Dan. Tell us about this song that we're going to close out with, Jamie. This song is entitled, I Think I'll Let You. This is a cappella, right?
Yeah, it's a cappella. It's basically my version of the first three steps, because I had heard that slogan, I can't, God can, I think I'll let him. And I wrote this song when I only had about a year sober, just in my guitar, because I really learned to play guitar as part of recovery. It was kind of something I did to fill some time. And I wrote this song very early in sobriety, but the recording you're hearing we just did about a year ago, and my brother and father are two of the background vocalists, and that's significant to mention. Because my dad was a big source of a lot of my trauma and a lot of issues I had to address. And in recent years, we've had a lot of healing and reconciliation go on. So I can't tell you how much it means to me that, my dad's voice is on this song.
Okay, well, we're going to listen to this song, I Think I'll Let You. This is beautifully done. Here we go.
I'm standing at the door of something wonderful and free. Through the window pane I looked at love and joy awaiting, but I'm standing in destruction. Misery consumes me. On my own I tried to ease my you can. I think I'll let you open up this door for me to freedom abounding. I can't, but you can. I think I'll let you open up this door for me to love and joy awaiting with happiness and peace. I searched and I tried everything I thought would fill this lonely gaping hole inside, but in the dark I stand. I've pounded on the door, yearning for that light I see. Never once did I ask for you to help me. I can't, but you can. I think I'll let you open up this door for me to freedom abounding. I can't, but you can. I think I'll let you open up this door for me to love and joy awaiting with happiness and peace. I can't, but you can. Here I am, I let you open up this door for me to freedom abounding. I can't, but you can. Here I am, I let you open up this door for me to love and joy awaiting with happiness, with happiness, with happiness and peace.
Absolutely amazing. Oh, thank you guys so much for being on the show. Just what a blessing. Folks, a special thank you to Dan Griffin and Dr. Jamie Marich. Please visit their website. You can go to the links here at our webpage at take12radio.com. Until our next broadcast, this is the Monty Man, along with my special guest this week. We're wishing God's perfect serenity for you. Bye-bye now.
This has been a broadcast of KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
Kitty, 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 kitty.